The memory that cuts the deepest isn't the sharp screech of tires peeling down my driveway. It was the sound of my own son laughing while I couldn't breathe. I was standing in my kitchen, one hand gripping the edge of the counter, the other pressed against my chest, trying to force open my own lungs. My son was still talking, and so was his wife. But neither of them was actually looking at me. They were consumed by the argument, solely focused on winning and making sure I understood that my refusal didn't matter. My name is Thelma Lloyd. I am 61 years old. Until that afternoon, I believed my children would never let harm come to me. I was wrong, and it took about 4 minutes to face that reality. It started simply enough. Roscoe and his wife Shonda dropped by wanting me to sign a document for a project much larger than before. More money, higher stakes. They wanted to leverage my credit to a point I had never agreed to. I refused. I told them I had given enough and that the shifting numbers made me uneasy. The moment the words left my mouth, Shonda's expression hardened. Roscoe's jaw clenched, mirroring his father's old look right before he used to raise his voice. "You'd rather see us fail than trust us one more time," Roscoe said. In that instant, I knew it was no longer a conversation. A rapid-fire argument followed. Their voices overlapped, drowning mine out until my chest tightened, the familiar warning sign that my airways were closing up. I told them as clearly as I could that I needed my inhaler, nodding toward my purse on the counter. But before I could move, Roscoe grabbed it. He didn't even look at me when he spoke. "Let's see how well you breathe when you don't get your way all the time." He tossed my purse to Shonda like it was nothing, acting as if it wasn't the only thing standing between me and a medical emergency. "If you've ever had someone you love use your vulnerability against you just to win, tell me where you're watching this from tonight. I want to know how many of us, in different houses under different names, have lived through this exact moment." I didn't even get a chance to argue. They walked toward the door, my purse swinging in Shonda's hand like a trophy. Both of them were laughing, the kind of laugh from people who never consider that actions have real consequences. I heard the car doors slam and the engine roar. Through the window as the tires rolled away, Shonda's voice echoed back to me one last time, sharp and mocking. "Good luck, old fool." Then, silence. I was alone in the kitchen, gasping for air, my hands shaking so violently I couldn't properly dial the phone. I don't remember if I hit the right digits, but my brother's voice came through, and after choking out his name, I lost my voice completely. Somehow, Alonzo understood. "Thelma, breathe. I'm calling 911 and I'm on my way. Don't hang up." I heard him firmly giving our address to someone in the background as my own awareness started to fade. By the time his car pulled into the driveway, the room was spinning. He drove faster than I had ever known him to, arriving just ahead of the ambulance. 3 days after leaving the hospital, I was still moving slowly, catching my breath on the stairs. The phone rang for a routine matter, my bank calling about a small transfer I had flagged the previous week. It had nothing to do with Roscoe or anything that had happened. Sitting at the kitchen table with the phone to my ear, I habitually reached into the side drawer where I kept official papers, looking for the old statement the representative asked about. Instead, my hand pulled out the wrong folder. Lloyd's Catering and Event Rentals Agreement. The label was in my own handwriting from 2 years ago. I put the phone on speaker and opened it. There it was, page after page, my signature on every line that required one. A 5-year personal guarantee for a commercial lease. My name was listed as the responsible party. If the business defaulted, I would be on the hook for everything. I had signed it at Roscoe's dinner table, full of pride and barely reading past the sticky notes and smiles he used to guide my pen. Behind it lay the line of credit documents. The same story, my name, my signature, making me liable if Shonda's bookkeeping fell apart. I don't know how long I sat there. The bank representative's voice faded into the background, still discussing the minor transfer, while I did the math I should have done long ago. Over 2 years, a casual, "Just sign here, Mom, it's routine," had materialized into a heavy stack of liabilities. My name carried more weight for a business I didn't run than the people actually operating it. "Ma'am, are you still there?" I picked up the phone, apologized, and ended the call as smoothly as I could. But after hanging up, my eyes stayed fixed on the lease agreement, specifically on a line stating that under certain conditions, with proper advance notice, a guarantee could be amended or revoked. I had no idea that section existed. I had never read that far down. Alonzo called that night, just like he had every evening since the hospital. "Are you resting?" he asked gently, as if treating me like fragile glass. "I am," I told him, a half-truth. My body was still, but my mind was racing. "Are you eating enough, Alonzo? I'm not going to break." He laughed softly, relieved to hear some fight left in my voice. Just making sure. You know I'll keep checking. I almost told him about the drawer, the lease, and the sentence I had reread 3 times to make sure I wasn't imagining things. But something stopped me. It wasn't fear. It was a need to process it entirely on my own before sharing it with anyone else, even him. "Get some sleep," he said when I didn't elaborate. "I'll call you tomorrow." After we hung up, I sat back down with the agreement open. For the first time since that argument and the sound of that car driving away, a feeling more stable than fear took over. It wasn't quite anger yet. It was just a cold, quiet realization. I had spent 2 years building a foundation under their feet, and no one had ever bothered to check if I had solid ground under my own. For 10 whole days, there was not a single call or text asking if I was alive. I counted the days involuntarily. It's like counting anything that hurts. Adding a specific number somehow makes the sting sharper. 10 days since the driveway. 10 days of silence from both of them. I didn't touch my phone either, because a quiet voice inside me had made a firm choice. This time, I wouldn't be the one to bend. On Thursday, I was at the hair salon, listening to the hum of the dryer overhead, when I heard Roscoe's name from 2 chairs over. It wasn't him. It was Cassandra, a woman who did floral arrangements for some of their events. She was a casual acquaintance who had no idea the news she was sharing was a live match. "They're moving forward with the 2nd location," she told her stylist while scrolling through her phone. "Shonda posted this morning about new doors opening. No matter who doubts you." I sat completely still under the dryer. No matter who doubts you. I didn't need to see the post to know exactly who that was aimed at. 10 days. No call to check on my recovery, but a public motivational post serving as an inside joke aimed directly at me. When I got home, I didn't search for it. I didn't need to see Shonda's smiling face next to whatever caption she wrote. I understood the subtext. To them, the kitchen conversation wasn't a boundary crossed. It was an obstacle cleared. They were framing it as a comeback story, and I was the doubter proven wrong. Alonzo called that night as usual, and I could hear a shift in his voice too. His caution told me he had noticed the prolonged silence as well. "Have you heard from Roscoe?" he asked, trying to sound casual but missing the mark. "No." A pause stretched over the line, longer than usual. "I haven't either." We sat in that silence for a moment. Across 300 miles of phone line, neither of us voiced what we both knew. A family doesn't go completely quiet like this unless someone finds silence easier than an apology. "Do you want me to say something to him?" Alonzo finally asked. "No," I replied quicker than expected. "Let it be." He didn't press, though I could tell he wanted to. Alonzo was always overly patient, always hoping a little more time would smooth over any fracture before he had to choose a side. I didn't mention Cassandra, the post, or the words that had been stuck in my head since leaving the salon. I wasn't ready to explain why that caption cut so deep. 10 days was enough to show me exactly where I stood with my son and daughter-in-law. Sitting in the kitchen with the phone cooling in my hand, I had no idea that 10 days was just the beginning of a much longer silence, one long enough to reshape everything that followed. The business card sat in my wallet for 4 days before I finally dialed the number. Mercer Whitfield's office wasn't fancy. It was a modest suite above a dry cleaner. The receptionist knew my name before I even introduced myself, telling me Alonzo's former colleague had already reached out. I sat across from a man about 10 years younger than me. He pushed his reading glasses onto his graying hair and opened a legal pad before I could say much more than hello. "Tell me what happened," he said. Not, "How can I help you?" but "Tell me what happened," as if he already suspected the situation was serious. So, I told him everything. The argument, the taken purse, them driving away, and Alonzo's voice pulling me back as I lay on the kitchen floor. He didn't interrupt once. He just took notes in a deliberate hand until I reached the part about the hospital and the paramedic who looked at Alonzo, understanding exactly how close it had been. Mercer put his pen down. "You understand what you're describing could warrant legal accountability. Reckless endangerment of a vulnerable adult is the bare minimum, possibly more depending on how authorities view the intent." I had thought about it. Lying in that hospital bed, a cold, clear part of me had examined that option more than once. "I considered it," I told him, "but I've decided against it." "May I ask why?" I looked out the window behind him, searching for the words to explain the knot in my chest. "Because legal penalties won't teach my son what he actually took from me. That just penalizes one afternoon. It doesn't touch the 2 years prior, where I was the sole financial anchor for that business while they never considered what would happen if I stopped. Mercer nodded slowly, the way a person does when they recognize a hard truth and choose not to argue with it. "Then let's talk about what you brought me," he said, sliding a folder across the desk. My lease agreement and line of credit documents, the papers I found in my drawer days after the ambulance left. It felt like realizing I had been living next to a ticking clock without knowing it. "You're the guarantor on both," he said, "which means you carry the risk for a business you don't run or see the books for, but you aren't trapped. Both agreements have revocation clauses. With proper notice to the lender and the landlord, you can terminate future liability." "How long does that take?" "The lease requires 30 days' notice. The bank's line of credit is similar, though internal processing might take slightly longer." He tapped the page. "Once you submit this, it can't be undone without your consent. And once it's filed, they will see it. There's no hiding this from them. They will know it was you." "I already knew that. I wasn't looking for a way to hide." "File it," I said. Mercer looked at me, his gaze lingering to ensure I truly understood the weight of the process I was starting. "Once this mechanism is in motion," he said quietly, "there's no telling exactly how it will land on them. It might be gradual, or it could fall apart faster than expected." I folded my hands in my lap without blinking. "Good," I said, "let it fall apart." Exactly 2 months to the day since the incident in the driveway, I sat in Mercer Whitfield's office and signed my name as anyone's financial safety net for the very last time. He had called me in to do it in person rather than mailing the paperwork, saying some things were worth doing face to face. The moment he laid the document in front of me, I understood what he meant. Notice of revocation of personal guarantee. My name was clearly printed right above the signature line next to a date that felt heavier than any date had in a long time. "Once I submit this," Mercer said, "it goes to both the landlord and the bank simultaneously. The 30-day clock starts today. After that, your name is removed from both liabilities. Whatever happens to that business from that point forward is no longer your responsibility." I thought about the sound of those tires on the driveway. I thought about Shonda's voice cutting through the window, carrying a cruelty she didn't care to hide. I thought about the 2 months of silence, and Cassandra mentioning the online posts I refused to look at. I thought about Roscoe and Shonda moving ahead with their expansion, acting as if the woman who nearly collapsed supporting their business didn't matter the moment she survived. I signed my name. Mercer folded the notices into envelopes right in front of me and sealed them. "I'll have these delivered this afternoon," he said. "You don't need to do anything else. They'll receive formal notice within a week. After that, it's out of your hands. The bank will protect its interests, and the landlord will protect theirs." He studied me for a second. "You need to understand this might not happen quietly." "I stopped expecting quiet the day they laughed and drove away," I replied calmly. Across town, in an office I would never visit, a man named Garland Fentress opened an envelope that would shift the direction of everything. He read the notice twice. That's the sort of thing a person does when the first reading catches them off guard, and the second is just to ensure they didn't misread it. A revoked personal guarantee. The exact account he had personally approved years ago, authorized entirely because the guarantor's financial stability turned a weak business plan into a bankable risk. He pulled up the file on his screen, looking at the original loan committee notes that stated, "Guarantor strength offsets limited operating history." He instantly understood what this meant for the numbers in front of him. He didn't know Thelma Lloyd's face. He knew nothing about the driveway, the inhaler, or the 2 months of silence that brought that envelope to his desk. All he knew was that a loan he previously classified as low risk had just transformed into something entirely different. Sometime in the next 30 days, he was going to have a conversation with the business owners that they definitely wouldn't want to have. He added a note to the file flagging the account for internal review, then reached for his phone to brief his supervisor. 2 months after a woman sat gasping in her own kitchen, the first domino she tipped had begun to lean toward 2 people who had absolutely no idea it was coming. They still thought the silence meant she had let it go. They were about to find out exactly how wrong they were. Alonzo showed up at my door with 2 coffees and a question that had clearly been weighing on him for days. "Are you ever going to tell me why you actually turned them down?" he asked, setting one of the cups in front of me at the kitchen table. "Because Roscoe still thinks it was just about the money, just business." I almost laughed, though nothing about it was funny. I got up and walked over to the drawer where I had started keeping things again. It didn't just hold the lease agreement anymore. It held a small stack of documents I had been gathering, even if I hadn't fully admitted to myself why. I laid the stack in front of him. "Look at this," I said, tapping the top page. It was a text message I had printed from my phone months ago, sent by a florist named Deja who used to handle their events. She had reached out to me directly instead of Roscoe or Shonda, asking cautiously, with the tone of someone terrified of causing trouble, if I knew why her last 2 invoices, now nearly 90 days past due, hadn't been paid. She added that she hated to bother me, but she didn't know who else to ask and didn't want to lose the client over what she assumed was just an oversight. 您从来没跟我说过这个? Alonzo said slowly, reading the message twice. I never told anyone. I called Shonda privately, quietly. I chose to give her the benefit of the doubt. She said it was a processing error and that it was taken care of. I slid the second page toward him. Then 2 months later, another vendor sent almost the exact same message. After that, the bookkeeper they hired before Vestal quit with barely any notice. Alonzo set the papers down slower than he had picked them up. You didn't tell me because I didn't want to be the mother who didn't trust her son's business, I said. I wanted to be wrong. So I watched silently. And every time I looked, I saw the same pattern. Whenever I asked direct questions, the numbers never added up. So when they came to me for that second guarantee, my mind was made up before they even finished asking. It wasn't out of spite, Alonzo. It was 2 years of hoping I was wrong finally running out. He sat there for a long time, slowly turning his coffee cup on the table without taking a sip. I could see him processing it in his usual way, looking for a scenario where this could still be smoothed over, trying to fix a family with a phone call and enough patience. Maybe if I go talk to him, he finally said. Not about the guarantee, just about all of this, man to man, uncle to nephew. Maybe he doesn't even realize how bad the books have gotten. Maybe, I replied, because I didn't have the heart to tell him plainly that I didn't believe a conversation could undo 2 years of bad habits, break 2 months of silence, or erase the sound of tires leaving my driveway while I struggled to breathe. Alonzo reached out and squeezed my hand, the same steady grip that had stayed with me through the ambulance ride. I still think there's a path forward that doesn't tear everything apart, he said softly. I didn't argue. I just hoped, for his sake rather than mine, that he wasn't about to find out how wrong he was. None of this reached my ears at the time. The way I learned about it, like most things that happened behind closed doors in that business, was secondhand, mostly from Roscoe himself later on, when he no longer had any reason to keep it from me. 3 weeks after Garland Fentress opened that envelope, the pressure from his internal flag finally reached the 2 people least expecting it. Roscoe told me he was standing in the back office of the event space, phone to his ear, listening to a loan officer explain in careful banking terms that the terms of their line of credit were under review due to a change in guarantee status. He said he didn't fully understand it, but he understood enough. What do you mean under review? He had asked. We've never missed a payment. It's not a matter of missed payments, Mr. Lloyd. The risk profile of the account has altered. We will follow up within the week. He told me he sat there for a long time after hanging up before he went to find Shonda. The bank is asking questions, he told her, something about our risk profile changing. He said her smile for the client in front of her didn't waver, but something in her expression shifted. Probably just routine, she told him. Banks do that all the time. A month before we're supposed to sign the second lease? Roscoe countered. She didn't answer. He said the client called her name, needing an opinion on a centerpiece, and she excused herself with the practiced warmth that had built their reputation in the first place. Roscoe admitted to me that watching her walk away, he found himself wondering, not for the first time, how much of what she told him about the books was actually true. It wasn't long before her phone buzzed on the counter. He caught a glimpse of it by chance. It was a vendor name he vaguely recognized, and the preview lingered just long enough for him to read, "Third time asking about the invoice. Need payment by..." before the screen went dark. Before he could fully process it, she slid the phone into her pocket quickly and casually. Who was that? Nobody important. I'll call them back later. Shonda. Not right now, she snapped, sharper than intended, before softening her tone. It's handled. I have the vendor accounts under control. He told me he let it go, just like he had let a dozen small details slide over the past year, because pushing meant admitting he didn't fully trust the person he built everything with. But the quick movement of her hand covering that screen left an uneasy feeling that stayed with him for the rest of the day. That night, after the venue went quiet, he found her in the back office with her laptop open. An interface was closed too quickly when he walked in. You said the vendor accounts were under control. They are. Then why do you look like you just got caught doing something you shouldn't be doing? He closed the laptop completely, Roscoe told me later. In that brief second before Shonda found her voice, he saw an expression on her face he'd never seen in all their years together. Pure fear. He confessed that was the exact night he started keeping a quiet mental checklist of things that didn't add up. It was long before he ever breathed a word to me, and well before Vestal found the paper trail that turned his suspicions into hard facts. At the time, I didn't even know the name Vestal Kinlaw, let alone what she was discovering while sitting at her own kitchen table staring at a mismatched spreadsheet. Like most things in that business, I found out after the fact. It's amazing how fast the truth surfaces when keeping secrets no longer protects anyone's interests. Vestal had been balancing the books for small businesses for 11 years. That's more than enough time to tell the difference between an honest mistake and a number someone hopes will never face a second look. She caught it on a Tuesday afternoon. Roscoe, still rattled by the lender's phone call, had asked her to audit everything from top to bottom. She found the first red flag while cross-referencing vendor payments with bank statements. According to the ledger, a linen company had been paid in full. But the bank statement showed no such withdrawal to that company, only a transfer made 3 days prior to an account she didn't recognize. She told me later that like any good bookkeeper, she looked for an innocent explanation before turning an anomaly into an accusation. A typo, perhaps, or a processing delay. But when she pulled up the records for the following month, it was clear this was no typo. Over a 4-month period, 3 more entries appeared. Each was logged as a paid vendor invoice, yet every single dollar went into that same unfamiliar account. The individual amounts were small enough to overlook unless someone looked at both sides of the ledger simultaneously, and until Roscoe panicked and asked her to double-check everything, no one ever had. She went straight to his office. "I need 5 minutes. We have some vendor payments that don't match up." He barely looked up, still buried in the bank's latest documentation demands. "Can it wait? I'm trying to get ahead of their next request." "Actually, this is exactly what you need to hear right now." She laid the statements in front of him, walking him through the discrepancy step by step. The ledger claimed a vendor was paid. The bank trail proved the money went somewhere else entirely. Roscoe frowned at the numbers, but didn't really absorb it. "Probably a banking error on the linen company's end," he muttered, already closing his laptop halfway. His mind was clearly still on the lender's deadline. "Can you just clean it up in the system? The bank is breathing down my neck. I don't have the energy for a software glitch today." Vestal hesitated. 11 years in the business had taught her to recognize when a client was dismissing her out of arrogance versus sheer exhaustion. Still, she stood her ground. "I'll look into it further, but for the record, I want it noted that I brought this to your attention today." Something in her tone made Roscoe actually look up for the first time. "You think it's serious?" "I think," she told him, "I'd rather be wrong now than proven right when it's too late to fix." He nodded abstractly, turning back to his screen. "Just track it down. We'll deal with it once the bank stuff settles." She left his office that day, but she didn't stop looking. That night, sitting alone at her own kitchen table, she opened her laptop and began pulling every vendor statement from the past year, determined to find out how far back this pattern went. It was that quiet persistence that finally gave her an answer a few weeks later, one that neither of them was ready to face. I opened my front door to find Shonda standing on my porch alone. Roscoe wasn't with her. Her arms were crossed tight against her chest as if she were freezing, despite the heavy summer humidity. "Can we talk?" she asked. Her voice lacked the sharp mockery I had last heard through her car window. I stepped aside and let her in, not because I had forgotten what she did, but because I wanted to see exactly what this visit was about. She sat at my dining room table, the exact spot where the argument had erupted 2 months ago. For a long moment she said nothing, just folding and unfolding a piece of tissue paper in her hands. "I haven't been sleeping," she finally said, "not since the bank started pressing us. I know you probably don't want to hear from me." "I'm listening," I said. My voice was flat, no warmth, no anger, just a statement of fact. "Thelma, I know things got out of hand that afternoon. About your inhaler. I've thought about it more times than you know." Her voice cracked slightly. It might have been genuine emotion, or it might have been well-rehearsed. I honestly couldn't tell, so I just watched her quietly. But revoking the guarantee now with everything going on, you have to know what that does to us. The stress alone is making it hard for Roscoe to function. My doctor even mentioned my blood pressure. She trailed off. I heard everything you said that day, I told her calmly. Even through the glass of that car window, I heard it perfectly, and I've spent 2 months processing it. I have no intention of reversing a legal process just because the consequences are suddenly uncomfortable for you. I'm not asking for myself, she said quickly, shifting tactics. I'm asking for Roscoe. He's your son, Thelma. No matter what you think of me, he didn't grab that bag out of malice. He was just overwhelmed. People make terrible choices when they panic. He knew I couldn't breathe, I said. He knew exactly what was happening, and he chose to do it anyway. And he laughed while he did it. That wasn't a man too panicked to think. That was a man who felt entirely safe, knowing he wouldn't face any real consequences. Shonda's eyes darted away for a split second, and in that flash, the performance slipped. Underneath it was a very real look of fear. I couldn't tell yet what she was truly terrified of, losing the business or something much worse. There are pressures we're dealing with that you don't understand, she said carefully, weighing each word for safety rather than truth. If this guarantee is pulled before we can restructure, we lose more than the second location. It could unravel everything. I watched her say it, wondering if that statement was a warning about Roscoe's financial reality or a confession of her own actions, masked as the same problem. Then I suggest the two of you figure out how to restructure quickly, I said, standing up to signal that the conversation was over. Because I've already told Mercer that my position isn't up for negotiation. Shonda rose slowly, the tissue paper completely shredded in her fist. At the door, she turned back one last time. You're really not going to fix this for him? No, I said, I'm not. She left without another word. I stood at the window and watched her walk to her car. Her steps were heavy, far heavier than those of someone simply disappointed by a tough conversation. It was the stride of someone who realized the final safety net they had been counting on was gone for good. I was completely in the dark while it was happening. I pieced the truth together later, some from Alonzo, and some straight from Roscoe months later during a rare moment of honesty when keeping secrets no longer protected anything. Marcellus Overby had been sending clients to Roscoe and Shonda for nearly 3 years. Ever since the first event they catered at his venue went flawlessly. He didn't call to say he was cutting ties. Roscoe told me later that wasn't Marcellus's style. He just stopped sending business their way. Roscoe said he noticed the drop-off the way you notice a sound stopping rather than starting. The referral emails that used to arrive every week or two completely dried up over the course of a month. He had been so overwhelmed by notices from the bank that he didn't catch the pattern until a prospective bride called him directly, bypassing Marcellus entirely. I just wanted to confirm everything is still moving forward as planned, she said, her voice carrying a hesitation that hadn't been there before. Marcellus mentioned there were some vendor adjustments, and I wanted to hear it from you directly. Roscoe told me his stomach dropped. He assured her everything was fine, keeping his tone light and professional. The moment he hung up, he dialed Marcellus. What did you tell her? He demanded. I told her I heard your vendor payments were backed up, and that she should verify her dates with you directly, Marcellus replied flatly. Look, Roscoe, I have 2 regular vendors still waiting on invoices from your last event. I can't keep sending clients your way when I'm hearing things like that. It's being handled, Roscoe said, using the exact phrase Shonda had given him weeks earlier. He admitted to me that hearing it come out of his own mouth felt incredibly weak this time. I hope so, Marcellus said. I'm not trying to hurt your business, but I have my own reputation to protect. Roscoe sat at his desk for a long time after that call, doing the math he had avoided for months. How many vendors were actually unpaid? How long had it been going on? How many things Shonda claimed were handled hadn't been touched at all? He didn't call me. He didn't call Alonzo either, though he later admitted a part of him knew his uncle probably would have helped if he had just been honest. Instead, he personally phoned 2 key vendors, promised them payments within a week, and scraped together just enough to get through that next wedding without the bride realizing how close it came to falling apart. That night, he and Shonda sat across from each other at the kitchen table, invoices spread between them like evidence neither wanted to acknowledge. Marcellus is pulling back, he said. If word gets out before this wedding, we lose more than just this one event. Shonda barely reacted, though her grip on her glass tightened. I'll call the vendors tomorrow. We'll smooth it over. With what? We need actual cash flow, Shonda, not another promise. She didn't answer. She just gathered the invoices into a neat stack, as if creating order on paper could fix the reality of their situation. Roscoe told me that was the first night he felt a chill that had nothing to do with the bank, a sudden, unsettling fear of what his own wife was still hiding from him. I didn't witness the confrontation that took place in their office late that Sunday night. The details reached me through Alonzo, who called me right after Vestal called him, her voice still shaking from what she had just gone through. Late Sunday evening, Vestal had been sitting at her kitchen table surrounded by a year's worth of statements, finally uncovering the truth. Once she dug deep enough, the mystery account behind the linen company's missing funds became instantly recognizable. It belonged to a collection agency, one that handled personal credit card debt, not commercial accounts. Over 5 months, 4 separate vendor payments had been logged as legitimate business expenses while actually being diverted to pay off personal debt. She told Alonzo she leaned back from her screen and just sat there in the dark for a long time. This wasn't a glitch or a banking error. Someone had been systematically using vendor funds to quietly clear personal liabilities, covering their tracks so carefully that only a full annual reconciliation would catch it. By Monday morning, she decided the only responsible option was to lay it out in front of both of them together, since she still couldn't be certain whose name was on the debt. She insisted on a 15-minute meeting that couldn't wait. Then, she placed the ledger entries right next to the actual bank transfers. The proof was undeniable. Vestal said Roscoe stared at the documents, looking confused at first. Then, as the reality clicked, his face drained of color. This isn't one of our suppliers. No, Vestal told him. It's a personal collection account tied to a credit card. It's not a business expense. She said the room went completely dead silent. Roscoe slowly turned to look at Shonda, whose face gave away everything. It wasn't confusion or surprise. It was the quiet panic of being caught. Roscoe, I can explain, Shonda said, reaching for the papers as if shifting them around could change the facts. It's not what it looks like. I was going to put the money back as soon as... As soon as what? Roscoe's voice was dangerously quiet. Vestal said she had never heard him use that tone before. As soon as things stabilized, it was just short term. I was going to replace it before anyone noticed. I swear I never meant for it to... You used vendor money to pay your personal debts, he said slowly, processing the weight of it. While vendors were calling about missing invoices, while Marcellus was pulling his referrals, while the bank was holding our guarantee questioning our solvency. I didn't have a choice, Shonda cried, her voice cracking. The credit card was going to collections regardless. I thought if I could just buy some time... You didn't buy time, Roscoe said. You threw it away. Vestal quietly packed up her files, recognizing that the conversation no longer required a bookkeeper. She told them she would have the final reconciliation ready by the end of the week and stepped out. Alonzo told me that as she left, she heard Roscoe's voice rise through the closed door, the first time she had ever heard him yell in all her time working for them. How much total, Shonda? I need the real numbers, all of them. When Alonzo finished telling me the story, I sat with the phone to my ear for a long time, finally understanding just how much rot had been hiding under the foundation I had recently pulled my name out of. What Roscoe did later that day was something I wouldn't find out about until much later. It was pieced together from Mercer's files and eventually confirmed by Roscoe during a very long, difficult phone call, but the details are clear enough to tell exactly as they happened. He sat in the bank parking lot for nearly 10 minutes before going inside, rehearsing a version of the truth that might still work in his favor. He didn't tell Shonda where he was going, nor did he call me, even though a part of him must have known it would eventually get back to me. He just couldn't sit still with unpaid wedding invoices, angry vendors, and Marcellus's warnings ringing in his ears. He had to try something. Garland Fentress met him in a small conference room, professional and detached, exactly how bank officers are trained to be. I want to see if there's a way to resolve this, Roscoe told him. My mother revoking the guarantee. I think if she understood the severity of the situation, she'd be willing to help. I can convince her to sign an extension. Did your mother authorize you to speak on her behalf regarding this guarantee, Mr. Lloyd? Fentress asked. Roscoe paused before answering. Not explicitly, no, but I know her. I think if I explain... Let me be completely clear, Mr. Lloyd, Fentress interrupted. Your mother submitted a formal notarized revocation. That document leaves no room for informal renegotiation, nor does it grant you authority to represent her position to this bank. Roscoe tried again, arguing that he wasn't misrepresenting anything, just trying to find a solution. But Fentress didn't budge. What you're describing is an attempt to use your mother's name and credit to negotiate terms she has not agreed to. I have to treat this as a compliance matter, not a family dispute. Especially following her initial notice, this is the second red flag on this account within a matter of months. Roscoe told me those words were what finally broke through his denial. He realized he couldn't talk his way out of this. "What does this mean for us?" he asked. "It means the grace period is over," Fentress said. "Before we discuss any credit lines or lease terms, I need written confirmation of your mother's actual position. I suggest you have an honest conversation with her directly, rather than through me." He sat in his car for a long time afterward, dealing with the cold certainty that he had completely exhausted his options, and that sooner or later I would find out exactly what he had tried to do. On that point, he was entirely right. When Alonzo first told me about it, I didn't say anything for a while. Not out of shock, very little they did could surprise me by that point. I sat in silence because a part of me had been waiting to see how far my son would go once all other doors were closed. He had finally found the last door and tried to use my name to force it open without my consent. Alonzo told me about the meeting the same way he told me most things during that period, after the fact, and only after he had processed it himself. Roscoe had called him, not Shonda. His voice was incredibly tight, the first time Alonzo had heard him sound that way since he was a teenager facing real trouble. "Uncle Al, I need you to talk to her," Roscoe pleaded. "The bank is calling for a full review. Everything is moving faster than we can handle, and if she could just give us a little more time." "Slow down," Alonzo told him. "What review? What happened?" Roscoe hesitated, long enough for Alonzo to know he wasn't getting the whole story. "I tried to talk to the loan officer to see if there was some flexibility." "Using what as leverage, exactly?" "I might have suggested that if Mom understood how bad it was, she'd probably agree to an extension." Alonzo said something inside him went cold and rigid right then. "You went to a bank officer and claimed you spoke for your mother without asking her first." "It wasn't like that." "Roscoe, is that what you did?" The silence on the line was more honest than any answer he could have given. Alonzo told them to come to his house that night, and they did. They sat stiffly at his kitchen table, and under his questioning the rest of the truth spilled out. Vestal's discovery, the personal collections account, the 4 months of diverted funds. Roscoe admitted that once the bank's review began, he had tried to find another lender willing to refinance them, but failed. Every single door had slammed shut before he came to me. Alonzo told me he leaned back in his chair, watching the last 2 months of careful optimism turn into something much harder. "So let me get this straight," he said to them. "You took her inhaler while she was having an asthma attack, laughed, drove away, and left her alone on her kitchen floor. And the entire time she's been quietly trying to protect herself from a business you've been mismanaging behind her back, you've been telling everyone, and telling yourselves, that it was just a misunderstanding." "It wasn't supposed to get this far," Roscoe muttered. "It was stupid. We know it was stupid." "It was never a misunderstanding," Alonzo told him sharply. "A misunderstanding is hiding someone's car keys. What you did put my sister in the hospital. If I had been 10 minutes later, we wouldn't even be sitting here having this conversation. You don't get to minimize it just because she survived." He said Shonda kept her eyes locked on the table. Roscoe opened his mouth to argue, but ultimately thought better of it. "And you," Alonzo said, turning to Shonda, "taking money meant for vendors to cover your own debts while your husband tells everyone things are under control. All while Marcellus pulls his business, and your mother-in-law lies in a hospital bed because of an action you found funny enough to mock out a car window. Uncle Al." "I spent 2 months asking her to soften her stance." His voice dropped to a quiet whisper. "Asking her to give you some grace because you're family. I will never ask her that again." He stood up, signaling that any hope they brought into the room was officially gone. "Whatever happens next, the 2 of you face it on your own. I am done standing between you and the consequences of your choices." When he relayed the conversation to me over the phone later, I didn't feel a sense of victory. It felt closer to sadness, but also a deep relief that I was finally allowed to just sit in the quiet. Mercer Whitfield spread the final paperwork across his desk like a man closing a chapter he'd watched unfold for months. "The bank completed their review," he said. "Between the revocation of the guarantee and the compliance red flags from your son's visit, they've called in the entire line of credit. The landlord followed suit. Since the guarantee is gone, the lease is in default. They're moving to repossess the property. Both entities have initiated liquidation proceedings against the business assets." I sat across from him with Alonzo beside me, closer than he'd sat in any of our previous meetings. He was no longer trying to salvage anything with a phone call. How fast? I asked. The listings go live within a week, but the actual process will take time. Between the notice periods, the landlord's filings, and the window for other creditors to respond, we're likely looking at several months before an auction date is set. These things always move slower than people expect, even when the gears are turning in the same direction. He slid a page toward me. You have the right to bid on the assets just like anyone else, if that's something you want to consider. Alonzo looked at me but didn't say a word, letting the option sit without putting pressure on it. I'll consider it, I said. Mercer nodded, understanding some decisions aren't made aloud in a lawyer's office. We left the building and stepped into a gray, overcast afternoon. Alonzo walked me to my car, pausing before he spoke. You know, I'm never going to ask you to back down again, he said. I should have stopped asking a long time ago. You were just trying to keep the family together, I told him. That's not a crime, Alonzo. Maybe not, but I spent 2 months asking you to carry a burden that wasn't yours to bear, and you were right to refuse. He opened the car door for me, an old habit from our father. Before I got in, he paused. Whatever you decide to do, whenever the time comes, I'm with you. My phone rang twice that night, both times showing Roscoe's name. I let it ring, watching the screen light up on the counter. In the past, ignoring my son's call would have made me feel guilty, but now it brought nothing but peace. An hour later, he called a third time, and I finally picked up. Mom, please, Roscoe said before I could even say hello. His voice cracked in a way I hadn't heard since he was a little boy. I know you have every right to be angry. I know I messed up, with the bank, with everything. But if we lose this business, we lose everything we've built. Please, just give us a chance to make this right before it gets worse. I let the silence stretch for a moment. Not out of cruelty, but because he needed to feel the weight of it, just as I had for the past 2 months. You had 2 months to call and check on me after leaving me on my kitchen floor, I said calmly. You didn't call to see if I was okay. You called the bank using my name to protect yourselves. I have no interest in giving you a chance you never thought to give me. Mom, goodbye, Roscoe. I hung up before he could say anything else, placed the phone face down on the counter, and sat in the quiet that followed. The listings went live 3 days later, just as Mercer said they would, and the resulting process took nearly a year to finally settle. A year after that afternoon in my kitchen, the auction house smelled of dust and old carpet, completely unlike the glamorous events Roscoe and Shonda used to host. The equipment that once brought those events to life was now tagged with numbers, lined up for strangers to bid on. I sat near the back with Alonzo beside me. Mercer was a row ahead, files ready in case I signaled him. I watched the auctioneer clear item after item, linens, lighting rigs, the very branding that used to mean something in this city. When it came to the business entity itself, the lease rights, the name, the client lists, I raised my hand before letting myself overthink it. No one outbid me. I suppose no one else in that room understood the business quite like I did. I had watched it operate from the inside for 2 years. I knew exactly what it was worth once you stripped away the mismanagement and personal debt. Mercer handled the paperwork afterward with the quiet efficiency he'd shown from day one. When we left, my name was on the titles, the new owner of everything Roscoe and Shonda used to claim as theirs. I didn't go straight home. Alonzo drove me to the house Roscoe and Shonda were still living in, the one piece of property they hadn't lost yet, though I suspected that was only a matter of time. You're sure about this? Alonzo asked as he pulled up to the curb. I need them to find out from the paperwork, not from me standing in front of them, I said. Everything I had to say to them face to face has already been said. I still had my key. No one had ever asked for it back through all those months. I let myself in. The house was dead quiet, both of their cars missing from the driveway. I walked straight to the dining room table where nearly a year ago I had left a very different envelope. Back then it was just a warning, not the end. I placed the folder right in the center of the table. Inside was the final letter from the bank confirming the line of credit was closed and settled through the liquidation sale, the landlord's termination notice, and the auction records, clear and undeniable, with my name printed cleanly under the buyer column. I didn't leave a note. The documents spoke for themselves. There was nothing left for me to explain. When I walked back out, Alonzo was waiting at the curb. We drove home in a silence that didn't need to be filled. I heard about the aftermath secondhand, which felt entirely appropriate given how they had learned about my decisions over the previous months. Roscoe found the folder first. According to Alonzo, who heard it from Roscoe days later, he had reached a point of calm resignation. The anger had burned away, leaving something closer to grief. He said Shonda went completely rigid reading the auction results, staring at my name on the page as if she could argue with the ink. They didn't call that night either. There was nothing left to negotiate. I sometimes think about that kitchen, the one I reclaimed without ever raising my voice. I think about the sound of those tires leaving my driveway and Shonda's voice cutting through the air, carrying a cruelty she never imagined would cost her a thing. They thought it was just a joke that ended the moment they turned the corner. A year later, they finally discovered it wasn't. I didn't hide anything from them. I just stopped being the person who saved them. The first thing I saw when I pulled off the cracked blacktop was a woman standing on my porch like she owned the place. My hands locked hard on the steering wheel, and the air caught tight between my chest and my throat. I hadn't told a soul I was coming here except Patricia, and Patricia was 40 miles away in the city, completely oblivious to what I was walking into. My name is Roberta Augustine. I'm 66 years old and I'm a widow. Until this morning, I thought the worst thing waiting for me at this neglected beach house would be dust and termites. Before I left this morning, I called Patricia and told her exactly where I was going and why. My son wants me to sell the place his father and I poured our lives into, I told her, but I'm not signing a single piece of paper until I look at it with my own eyes. She told me to call her the second I arrived. I promised I would, but I didn't know then that I'd soon have a reason to forget that promise entirely. The drive felt much longer than it used to. 23 years is enough time to change a landscape, making even familiar turns look strange. By the time I pulled up to the property, the sun was low, casting long shadows across the weeds that had completely overtaken the front yard. The gate hadn't been touched since Lionel passed. Rust had eaten into the hinges, and when I pressed my hands against the iron bars and pushed, it let out a sharp screech that felt like a protest against my return. I want to pause here for just a second. If you're watching this video, please take a moment to leave a comment letting me know where you're tuning in from tonight. I read every single one, and tonight, more than ever, I think I could use the company. I managed to shove the gate open just enough to squeeze through, brushing the rust flakes off my palms. That's when I looked up. She was standing right there on the porch, not a stranger and not a drifter looking for shelter. Even before I could see her face clearly, I knew the silhouette. The way she held her shoulders and shifted her weight to one hip looked like she was bracing herself for something. My knees felt weak, and the air around me felt incredibly thin. I stood frozen, unable to take a step. In that single moment, I couldn't even tell if my heart was still beating or if it had completely stopped, just trying to process the image my eyes simply refused to accept. She didn't run, and she didn't hide. She just stood there, staring back at me with the same sheer disbelief. My own face must have been a mirror of that exact shock. For a second, it felt like we were both waiting for the other to vanish into the fading sunlight, proving this was nothing but a cruel trick of the mind. I thought of Lionel. I thought of every single time he drove out here alone, 4 times a year, never staying more than 2 days. No matter how many times I offered to join him, he never let me. I thought of all those lonely nights back at our house in the city, never once suspecting that the heavy silence he brought back with him wasn't grief for an empty beach house. It was something else, a crushing weight he was carrying completely alone. Finally, my feet moved. One step, then another. The rusty gate groaned behind me, swinging shut on its own, as if deciding I belonged inside now. The woman's lips parted. Her hand lifted slightly, reaching for me, but froze in midair as if she couldn't believe I was real either. Then came her voice, weak, raspy, barely carrying over the wind rushing through the overgrown grass. Roberta. She spoke my name like she was looking at a ghost. Her hand fell limp to her side the moment the word left her mouth, as if she suddenly realized she had broken a sacred rule. Before I could take another step toward her, she began shaking her head, backing away toward the front door. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered. "You need to leave right now, Roberta. Go." "Leave? Before what?" My voice came out much sharper than I intended. For 23 years, I had mourned her. I had stood before an empty headstone my mother insisted on placing, even though there was nothing underneath it. And now my own sister was telling me to walk away. Her eyes darted past me, scanning the empty road and the gate I had just forced open. Her entire body was rigid, like a woman listening for a sound she prayed she'd never hear. "I mean it," she urged. "Please just turn around." "I buried you," I said, the words cutting through the air before I could soften them. I stood in the rain at a funeral with an empty casket because there was nothing left to put inside. For 23 years I thought my sister drowned, and you're standing on this porch telling me to leave." She clenched her jaw. For a second, it looked like she might actually do it. Turn around, walk inside, lock the door, and leave me screaming at the wood and glass. But she didn't. She just stood there, wrapping her arms around herself as if the evening air had suddenly turned freezing. "It's not safe for you to be asking questions here," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Not safe from who?" I took a step closer. "Evelyn, look at me. I am not getting back in that car until you tell me exactly what is going on." She let out a long breath that sounded less like relief and more like total surrender. Her eyes moved slowly across my face, searching for the sister she remembered, the one she left behind, now older, harder, and entirely out of patience. "You don't understand what you're stepping into," she said. "Then explain it to me." "I can't." "Can't or won't." A flash of pure exhaustion crossed her face. It was the look of someone who had carried a heavy burden for so long that her arms forgot how to put it down, even when she desperately wanted to. She turned slightly, leaning one hand against the porch pillar for support. "I swore an oath never to speak of it," she said. "Not to anyone, not even to you." "An oath to who?" She didn't answer. Instead, her shoulders slumped, and the wall she had been holding up between us finally crumbled. When she spoke again, her voice sounded small, carrying a fear I hadn't heard since we were girls. "Do you think I wanted you to believe I was dead?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Do you think this hasn't broken me into pieces every single day?" I didn't move. I didn't even breathe. "Lionel knew," she said quietly. "He knew the whole time." The name hung heavily in the air between us, shattering the silence. I felt my legs give out, and I sank down onto the second step of the porch, standing suddenly becoming too much for my body to handle. "He knew," I whispered to myself. "Those trips, 4 times a year, never more than 2 days." I looked up at her. "He was coming here to see you." Evelyn sat down slowly beside me, her movements stiff. Up close, the porch light couldn't hide what the years had done to her. Fine lines etched the corners of her eyes, and her thin face spoke of a life spent missing meals. "He brought me what he could," she said. "Money when he had it, and updates about you and the kids. But he never told me anything that could put you in danger if you accidentally said the wrong thing to the wrong person." I stared at her. "He never told me a thing." "I know," she said softly. "I begged him to tell you more than once." I looked at her in absolute disbelief. "He told me keeping you in the dark was the hardest thing he ever had to do," she continued. "But every time he came here he said the same thing. If Roberta knows, she has to carry it alone. And if Marvin ever suspects she knows, he'll watch every expression on her face, every word she says. If she truly knows nothing, she can't accidentally betray you, because she has nothing to betray." He hated it, Roberta. But he believed keeping you blind was the only protection he had left to give you. "Protection from what?" I demanded. "Evelyn, give me a name." She shook her head rapidly, terror flashing in her eyes at the very question. "I can't say his name yet." "Why not?" "Because I had to disappear, Roberta. I didn't choose this life. Someone left me with absolutely no choice." Her voice broke on the last word, and she pressed her lips tight, forcing the emotion back down. Instinctively, I reached out and took her hand. She let me hold it, though her fingers were trembling violently in my palm. "You can tell me now," I told her. "He can't hurt you through me." "That is exactly how he would hurt me." She turned fully to face me, her eyes wet but intense. "If I say his name here today, with no plan and no protection, it won't stay a secret. People talk. News travels faster than you think, even from a place like this. And if it gets back to him before I am ready, he won't come for me first." "What does that mean?" She squeezed my hand hard, trying to make me understand the crushing weight of her fear. "It means he goes after the thing he's most afraid of losing," she said. "And right now, that means anyone who is still within his reach." I thought of Isaiah. I thought of every casual phone call he made about this house, and how casually he brought up Marvin's name like it was nothing, just family helping family. "Roberta, I need time," she said, cutting off my next question. "Just a little time to figure out how to handle this correctly. So when I do speak, it's not just words lost to the wind. It has to mean something. It has to protect you, not just relieve my conscience." I wanted to fight her on it. I wanted to force the truth out right there on those steps. But the way she held my hand, desperate, pleading, 23 years late, told me that if I pushed too hard tonight, I might lose her all over again. "All right," I whispered, "time." She let out a massive breath, a weight lifting from her shoulders for the first time since she saw me at the gate. "Saying his name will bring him here," she said quietly. "I just need time." I left Evelyn that night with a promise to return in 2 days. The silence between us was so heavy that even hours later, sitting in my own kitchen in the city, I could still feel it pressing against my chest. I didn't sleep a wink. The entire drive home I kept replaying her words, searching for some thread of logic only to find more questions. By morning, I had made up my mind about one thing. If Lionel left any documents or records that could point to who Evelyn was running from, his estate paperwork was the only logical place to start. I called the attorney handling Lionel's estate. Mr. Whitlow was a soft-spoken man who had known my husband for over 15 years. He answered on the second ring, clearly surprised to hear from me so soon after the holidays. "Mrs. Augustine," he said, "I didn't expect to hear from you until the spring filings. Is everything all right?" "I need to know exactly what Lionel left to my name," I said. "Specifically the beach house. I need to know whose name is actually on the title." A brief pause stretched over the line, followed by the rustle of papers. "That property belongs entirely to you, Mrs. Augustine. Lionel made sure of that years before he passed. Sole ownership, no liens, no other names attached." A wave of relief washed over me, but it was immediately followed by a cold, heavy sense of unease. "Then why," I asked slowly, "did Isaiah tell me Marvin was already handling the paperwork for it?" Another pause stretched out, longer this time. "Marvin has been involved in the family financial matters for a very long time," Mr. Whitlow said, choosing his words with extreme care. "If I remember correctly, he assisted in setting up the initial family trust structure and handled the day-to-day administration from the beginning. My office only handled the estate planning and probate matters when Lionel requested legal services. Lionel always said Marvin had a mind for numbers that the rest of you didn't care to bother with." "He set up the trust," I repeated. "Yes, your husband trusted him completely with it. Frankly, most of the family did. Whenever there was a question about the trust or family finances, everyone called Marvin." I sat in silence, processing the information as a cold pit formed in my stomach. Decades of total trust handed over to one man, with no one else ever asking to see the fine print. "Mr. Whitlow," I said carefully, "has Marvin contacted you recently about the beach house?" The pause that followed felt entirely different, much heavier. "As a matter of fact, yes," he said. "A few weeks ago, he requested copies of the property records. He said he was gathering documentation on Isaiah's behalf to ensure everything was in order for a potential sale." My hand tightened around the receiver. "On Isaiah's behalf?" I asked. "That's what he told my staff, yes. I assumed you were aware." I knew absolutely nothing. Not about the request, not about the timeline, and certainly not about how long Marvin had been quietly pulling strings behind a closed door I didn't even know existed. "Thank you, Mr. Whitlow," I managed to say. "I'll be in touch." I hung up and stood in my kitchen for a long time, staring into the empty space. It felt like the ground beneath the marriage and family I thought I knew was shifting. 2 days later, I drove back to the beach house. Mr. Whitlow's words echoed in my head with every mile of that long road. This time, Evelyn was waiting for me on the porch, as if she had been watching for my car since sunrise. We sat inside the small sitting room, a space I barely recognized from my memories, and I told her everything Mr. Whitlow had said. The moment I mentioned Marvin's name, her face changed. It wasn't shock, it was a visible hardening, a defensive tightening, like an old injury being pressed without warning. "He's always controlled the money," she whispered. "Longer than you know." I was about to ask her what she meant when I noticed her eyes dart momentarily toward a spot near the closet at the edge of the room. It was a single floorboard, slightly raised and subtly darker than the wood around it, as if it had been lifted and replaced more than once over the years. "What's under there?" I asked. Evelyn went rigid. "Something you don't need to know about tonight." "Evelyn." She didn't answer right away. Instead, she stood up, walked slowly across the room, and knelt beside the board, as if just nearing it took a massive amount of physical effort. Her fingers hovered over the edge for a long moment before she finally pried it open. "I found this years ago," she said, pulling out a small, dusty metal lockbox. "Lionel left it here during one of his visits. He told me to keep it safe, just in case." "In case of what?" He never said directly. She looked down at the box. "Only that he didn't know who he could safely trust anymore, and if anything happened to him, this was the one place he knew no one would think to look." Everyone assumed this house had been abandoned decades ago." She paused. "He made me swear never to touch it unless there was absolutely no other choice." "And you never opened it?" She shook her head. "I told myself it was because I didn't have the key, but the truth is I was terrified of what was inside, terrified of what it would force me to do once I knew. I understood that fear better than I cared to admit. Some truths feel safer when they're sealed away, because once you see them, you can never pretend you don't know the cost of keeping them." "We don't have to open it tonight," I said, even as my hands reached for it. "No, we do." Evelyn's voice came out firmer than I expected. "I've carried this completely alone for long enough." She found a thin letter opener in a nearby drawer and carefully pried beneath the old lock until it gave way with a metallic click. Inside lay folded documents, their edges yellowed with age, carrying the faint scent of salt air and time. There were old bank statements and a small ledger handwritten in Lionel's neat slanted script, rows of numbers and dates organized into tight, precise columns. I lifted the ledger with both hands, my eyes scanning past transfers I couldn't comprehend, account names I'd never heard of, and dates reaching back much further than I ever imagined. Evelyn leaned in closer, and she let out a sharp gasp as my finger stopped near the bottom of a page. It was a recorded transfer with a signature right next to it. The handwriting was small but unmistakable. "Marvin." Evelyn's hand flew to her mouth, and neither of us spoke. The only sound in that room was the faint creak of the floorboard settling back into place, as if the house itself had just exhaled a secret it had been holding onto for far too long. I set the ledger down on the floor between us, but my eyes remained glued to that signature, as if staring at it long enough could change what it said. "你一直都知道这件事," I said, the words slipping out. "You knew from the very beginning." Evelyn didn't answer right away, and her silence grated on my nerves in a completely different way than it had before. This time, it wasn't fear holding her back. It was hesitation, maybe calculation, and it sparked a sudden sharp frustration inside me. "Evelyn, you let me believe you drowned. You let me mourn you for 23 years, and now you're sitting here deciding how much of the truth you're willing to give me." Her head snapped up. "Do you think it's easy for me to watch you piece this together bit by bit, knowing I should have been the one to tell you everything from the start?" "Then tell me," I said. "Give me the whole picture, not just fragments." She looked back down at the ledger, clenching her jaw before she finally spoke. "I caught him years ago before any of this happened." She gestured vaguely toward the lockbox. "Marvin was managing the family trust. The trust he built, the one everyone trusted him with because no one else wanted to deal with the numbers. I found discrepancies. Money being moved out, hidden under fees and administrative costs that no one would think twice about." "How much?" "Enough that it was never a mistake," she said. "Enough that when I confronted him directly, he didn't even bother to pretend it was an accident." "What did he say?" Her hands twisted together in her lap. "He told me I didn't understand how trusts worked. To him, what I saw as irregularities was just standard management at that level. He said it all with a smile, like he was explaining something simple to a child." "You didn't believe him?" "Of course I didn't believe him." Her voice broke, sharp and sudden. "I was never stupid, Roberta, no matter what you've thought of me all these years while I've been hiding out here." The words stung, deeper than I expected. I realized my tone must have sounded like an accusation of compliance rather than an attempt to understand how she survived. I softened my voice. "I don't think you're stupid," I said. "I think you were terrified. I just need you to stop keeping me out so I can help you." The expression on her face shifted at that. The hard edge in her eyes receded slightly, revealing something raw underneath. "It wasn't just one conversation," she said quietly. "It wasn't like I caught him once and let it go. I confronted him more than once over the course of several months because I kept thinking that if he knew someone was watching, he might stop." "Did he?" She shook her head slowly. "The last time I confronted him," she said, "he stopped arguing entirely. He asked me where I had been that morning, noting that I'd gone to the grocery store before coming to see him, and then asked if your children liked the candy I'd bought them. I had never told him I saw the kids that day. I had never told him where I'd gone." She took a slow breath. Then he smiled and said, "It would be such a terrible tragedy for the family if someone got hurt over a misunderstanding." He didn't raise his voice. He just wanted me to know he could reach the people I loved at any moment. She looked back down at the ledger, at the signature neither of us could keep our eyes off for long. "That wasn't the last time I caught him," she said. A week passed before I went back to the city. I spent every evening of that week with Evelyn, listening to the few details she could bring herself to share, before driving back each night to a house that felt even emptier since Lionel's funeral. I hadn't told Isaiah anything yet. I didn't trust myself to say it the right way until I understood exactly what kind of situation I was dealing with. So when he called and invited me to dinner at his place, I went. I told myself I would watch and listen before saying a single word about the beach house, about Evelyn, or about any of this. Marvin was already there when I arrived. He was sitting at Isaiah's dining table, looking as much a fixture of that house as he had for decades, and in a way he was. He stood up when I walked in, all warmth and practiced charm, pulling out my chair before I could reach it myself. "Roberta," he said, studying my face. "You look exhausted. Is everything all right?" "Just a long week," I said, letting it rest there. Dinner with Marvin always moved at his tempo. Easy laughter, stories about Lionel, bringing a smile to Isaiah's face that I hadn't seen since the funeral. It was the kind of comfortable silence that didn't feel like silence at all. Watching him, I found myself studying details I'd never noticed before. The way he refilled glasses before anyone had to ask. The subtle way he steered conversations, always landing exactly where he intended. "Speaking of which," Marvin said, setting his fork down with practiced ease, "I spoke with Whitlow's office again this week about the beach house." My fork hovered in midair. "I figured I'd help keep things moving," he continued, glancing at Isaiah before looking back at me. "There's no need for you to handle all that paperwork alone, Roberta, especially with everything else you're dealing with right now." "I haven't decided to sell yet," I said carefully. Isaiah's expression shifted, a slight frown touching his brow. "Mom, we talked about this. The house is just sitting there, falling apart. Uncle Marvin is just trying to help. And I appreciate it," I said, keeping my voice steady despite the sudden chill in my stomach. "But it's my decision." Marvin kept that easy smile, lifting his hand slightly like a man dropping an argument he had no real intention of losing. "Of course it is. I'm just trying to make it easy for you. In fact," he paused, reaching for his wine glass almost casually, "I already have someone interested, a buyer who is ready to move the moment you decide to go that route." The table went quiet, a little too quiet. "A buyer," I repeated, "this quickly?" "These things always move faster than people think," he said, smiling at me over the rim of his glass. He acted as if he hadn't just told me something entirely illogical. How could there be a buyer for a property that was sitting empty, unlisted, and unseen by anyone outside our family for over 20 years? "Who is this buyer?" I asked. "I need at least a name before I consider anything." "I'll have my office send over the details," Marvin said smoothly, already turning to refill Isaiah's glass. The question slid right off him, completely unanswered. I made a silent note right there at the table. He never actually gave me a name. Marvin's voice stayed with me long after I left that dinner. His casual mention of a buyer for a house nobody knew existed ringing in my ears. It made absolutely no sense, and the only solution I could think of was to find someone who might remember the bank Lionel's ledger pointed to. It took me 2 full days, dozens of phone calls, and pulling on every old connection I had left to track down a name from that branch years ago. A retired teller living quietly on the edge of town. Constance Pruitt. She opened the door slowly, studying me through the screen before unlatching it. Her movements were those of a woman who had learned caution the hard way. "Augustine," she said before I could introduce myself. "I always wondered when someone from that family would finally come knocking on my door." She let me in, poured tea that neither of us touched, and sat across from me in a small living room crowded with old photographs and neatly stacked church fans. "I spent 18 years at that bank," she said. "In that time I saw a lot of things cross my desk. Most of it was nothing, some of it wasn't." "I found a ledger," I told her, "in Lionel's handwriting. There was a name on a transfer that didn't look right." Her eyes sharpened instantly. "Marvin Lashley." The air left my lungs. "You remember him, dear? I remember exactly why I stopped working there." She let out a short, bitter laugh entirely devoid of humor. "I flagged a transfer back then. It wasn't the first time I thought something was wrong with that trust, but it was the first time I put it in writing and sent it up the chain." "What happened?" "Nothing happened to him," she said flatly. "Everything happened to me. Within a month I was let go. They called it restructuring. Funny how restructuring always seems to find the people asking the wrong questions." I leaned forward. "Did anyone ever investigate the report?" "Not that I ever heard of. By the time I walked out the door, it was like it never existed." She paused, studying me carefully now, weighing how much trust to place in a woman she barely knew. "You didn't come all the way out here just to verify an old man's signature, did you?" "No," I admitted. "I think he's still doing it. I don't think he ever stopped." Constance sat in silence for a long time, her hands folded in her lap. Then, slowly and deliberately, she stood up and walked over to a small cabinet by the window. She pulled out a thin, yellowed folder and placed it on the table between us without a word. "I kept a copy," she said. "Company policy said I shouldn't have back then, but after I was fired, I couldn't shake the feeling that my report would disappear with me. I told myself it was foolish, holding on to something that didn't matter to anyone but me." My hands shook slightly as I reached for it. "Why keep it all these years?" I asked. She looked at me, her gaze steady and unwavering. "Because deep down," she said, tapping the folder with her hand, "I always believed the original got buried. And if the day ever came when someone needed proof that at least one person tried to stop him, I wanted to have it. I just didn't think it would take this long for someone to come looking for the truth." I drove straight back to the beach from Constance's house, that folder sitting on the passenger seat like a live wire. Evelyn was waiting on the porch again. The moment she saw my expression, she knew I had found something to back up the fear she had been carrying completely alone. I told her everything Constance had said, watching her absorb each detail with a quiet stillness that terrified me more than tears would have. When I finished, she sat heavily on the porch steps, staring out into the empty space. "There's more," she said, her voice barely audible. "You said that wasn't the last time you caught him. You haven't told me what happened next." She nodded slowly, as if she'd known this moment was coming and had just been waiting for the strength to meet it. 5 years after I disappeared," she said. "I almost went back. I tried to convince myself that enough time had passed, that maybe he had let it go and found a way to keep the trust quiet without needing me to stay gone." She wrapped her arms around herself. "I called him just once to tell him I was thinking about coming home." "What did he say?" She clenched her jaw. "He didn't raise his voice. That's the thing about Marvin, he never needed to. He just got very quiet, very soft, and told me he'd heard you were taking the children to visit your mother that week. He said what a terrible shame it would be if something happened to them on the road, with the conditions being what they were this time of year." The air left my lungs in an instant. "He threatened my children." "He didn't say it directly," Evelyn said. "He never left a paper trail, but I knew exactly what he meant. Before I disappeared, he had already shown me how much he knew about where people went and who they saw, things an outsider could never know. It didn't matter if he was bluffing. I wasn't willing to risk your children's lives to find out." She swallowed hard. "I hung up that phone, and I didn't try again for 18 years. Why didn't you ever go to the police, even quietly, far away from here?" "With what proof, Roberta?" she asked. "The word of a respected, upstanding man against a woman everyone assumed was dead. I didn't have documents then, no ledger, nothing but my own word. If I walked into a station claiming I'd been dead for 5 years, they would have questioned me before they ever questioned him. And by the time anyone decided whether to believe my story, he would have known I was alive. If they couldn't prosecute him, I would have handed him exactly what he wanted, my location. I couldn't gamble my family's safety on the chance that someone might believe me." A cold rage settled into my bones, making my hands shake where they gripped my knees. 18 years. My sister had been hiding in this house for 18 years because a man who smiled and shook hands at funerals, claiming to be family, threatened to hurt my children if she ever tried to come home. "How did you even survive out here all this time?" I asked. "The money, the food, the cash Lionel left helped through the hardest parts," she said. "The rest I made myself. A small garden out back, doing mending and laundry for people 2 towns over who never asked too many questions about a quiet woman who didn't even use a last name." "He's a monster," I said, the word feeling entirely too small for what he had done. "He's careful," Evelyn corrected. "That's worse. Monsters eventually get caught. Careful men don't." I looked at her, a chill running down my spine. "Evelyn, does he know you're still here, today?" She hesitated, and the pause told me the answer before she could even speak. "I don't think he knows for sure," she said. "But over the years, I've seen his car drive past on the main road more than once, driving slow like he's looking for something, never stopping, never coming close enough to the gate to see inside." She turned to face me, terror flashing in her eyes for the first time since I arrived. "But he's looked," she said. "More than once. He's always suspected." 3 days later, Isaiah called. The tension in his voice before he even finished saying hello told me everything had shifted while I wasn't looking. "Mom, we need to talk about the house," he said, his tone firmer than usual. "And I need you to listen to me this time. Uncle Marvin says you've been acting strange lately, driving out there alone, not answering your phone for days. He's worried about you. Frankly, so am I." My stomach knotted up immediately. What exactly is he worried about? "He thinks the grief is hitting you a lot harder than you're letting on," Isaiah said, his voice cautious, like he was repeating a script he had practiced to convince himself. "He said it's not unusual for people to lose a partner after so many years and start hyper-focusing on things that don't make sense anymore, dwelling on the past instead of moving forward." He continued, "He said you're fixating. He thinks your mind might not be as sharp as it usually is. Honestly, Mom, the way you're handling that house, refusing to sign anything, disappearing out there without telling anyone, I'm starting to wonder if he's right." I sat down slowly at the kitchen table, pressing the phone tight against my ear. A cold realization settled into the space between my son's words and my own racing thoughts. Marvin wasn't raising his voice or making loud threats. He didn't need to. He was simply planting a seed. She's not thinking clearly, and he was letting that seed take root in the mind of the person who trusted him most. "Isaiah, my mind is sharper right now than it has been in years," I said. "There are things about that house and about your father that you don't understand yet. Then explain it to me," he said. "Because right now, all I see is you breaking down over a piece of property that's falling apart, just like you are. Dad is gone, Mom. He's not coming back. It doesn't matter how many times you drive out there just to sit with whatever memories are left." Those words cut deeper than he intended. I closed my eyes, steadying my breath before replying. "This has nothing to do with grief," I said quietly. "This is about the truth. It's about the burdens your father carried. Things I am only now beginning to understand." "What truth? What are you even talking about?" "I can't explain it yet. Not until I am absolutely certain." "That is exactly what Uncle Marvin said you would say." Isaiah's voice rose, frustration breaking through his calm facade. "Mom, listen to yourself. You sound like you're chasing ghosts." I flinched at the word. He had no idea what that word actually meant to me now. "Isaiah, I think you need to let Dad rest." His voice came through rough and strained, a mix of sorrow and anger that broke my heart. "I think you need to stop digging all of this up. Let him rest instead of dragging his memory into a story that only you seem to understand." The line fell completely silent, heavy with unspoken tension. For the first time since this started, I felt the full weight of standing completely alone against a man my own son had learned to trust more than me. The next morning I drove back out to the beach house, Isaiah's words still aching in my chest. I laid everything out on Evelyn's small kitchen table, Lionel's ledger, Constance's flagged report, and the bank statements yellowed with age. We sat together for hours, verifying dates and matching names, building an undeniable chain of evidence against a man everyone else trusted blindly. "Look at this," Evelyn said, sliding the ledger toward me, her finger stopping on a column of dates near the back. "These transfers didn't stop after I left. They kept going. Different amounts, same pattern, year after year." "This went on for 2 decades, I said. The number felt heavier than I expected, even though I already knew the pieces. 20 years and nobody questioned it," Evelyn whispered, "because nobody else ever felt the need to look. He made sure of that from the very beginning." I leaned back in my chair as things finally snapped into place. For the first time, I saw the full picture. He had built the trust himself, designing the entire structure. Lionel had told me. The lawyers had told me. Everyone always said the same thing. He had a gift for numbers the rest of us didn't want to deal with. "So nobody looked," Evelyn said flatly. "And why would they? You don't audit the man everyone calls the smart one. You just hand him the keys and thank him for carrying the weight you didn't want to bear." A cold certainty washed over me. That is exactly how the truth feels when it rearranges everything you thought you knew about the people you love. What kept this going for 20 years wasn't carelessness. It was trust, quietly turned into a weapon, leaving us completely blind to the trap right in front of us. "There's one more thing," I said, pulling Constance's report closer and scanning the final page again. "Look at this line at the bottom. It says the trust was never formally dissolved. Even though the majority of the assets were supposedly distributed years ago, the legal structure itself was kept open." Evelyn frowned, leaning in. "What does that mean exactly?" "It means he still has access," I said slowly. the full scope of his plan finally becoming clear. Even now, to this day, as long as that trust technically exists, he can move funds through it, fabricate reasons for withdrawals, and keep doing what he's always done. On paper, it just looks like an active account he's managing. Evelyn's face drained of color. And if the house sells, I finished, he gets the final piece he needs. No property left tied to the original trust. No physical evidence left for anyone to stumble upon like I did. He quietly closes it out, walks away clean, and no one ever has a reason to look back at any of it. The kitchen fell silent, save for the faint creaks of the house settling and the distant sound of the waves beyond the dunes. "That's why he's pushing so hard," Evelyn whispered. "It's not even about the money for him anymore. It's about erasing the last piece of evidence that proves what he did." I looked at the documents spread across the table. 20 years of quiet, calculated theft hidden behind a smile. Everyone in my family had learned to trust him implicitly. I felt something inside me shift from apprehension to absolute resolve. "Then we don't let him close it," I said. "Not until everyone sees what he's been hiding." 2 days later, Marvin showed up at my front door without warning. He was holding a small box of pastries, acting as if the visit were nothing more than a casual family gesture. "I thought you might want some company," he said with a warm smile, the exact easy expression I had seen across dining tables 1,000 times. "You've been looking so tired lately. Isaiah mentioned he was worried about you." "That's sweet of him," I said, stepping aside to let him in, keeping my voice as level and ordinary as possible. We sat in the living room, the pastries left untouched on the coffee table between us. Marvin started with small talk, comfortable and light, designed to lower my guard before bringing up his real reason for stopping by. "How are things coming along with the house?" he finally asked, stirring sugar into a cup of coffee he had no real intention of drinking. "Any closer to a decision?" "Still thinking about it," I said. "Take your time," he replied. "There's certainly no rush on my end. I only mentioned the buyer because I didn't want you to miss out on a good opportunity." "I understand." He studied me for a moment, just a fraction longer than normal conversation required. His smile remained perfectly in place, even as his eyes grew slightly sharper. "I hear you've been spending a lot of time out there lately, more than usual. That's a bit surprising for a place you always said held too many difficult memories to be comfortable." "It's complicated," I said carefully. "It feels a bit closer to Lionel's memory out there." He took a slow sip of his coffee. "Funny thing about that property. I always assumed with it sitting empty all these years, the roof would have been halfway caved in by now, the gate rusted shut." He paused for just a beat. "But from what I understand, it's surprisingly solid." A sudden chill went straight through me. I had never told him a single thing about the condition of that house. I hadn't even told him it was still standing, let alone given him any reason to have heard anything about it from anyone else. "I was surprised too," I said, keeping my voice completely calm despite my heart rate accelerating. Marvin smiled again, setting his cup down carefully. "Lionel built things to last. The man never did anything halfway." "No, he didn't," I agreed, watching him now with a completely different level of focus, waiting for the next slip. But he didn't slip again. He simply stood up, smoothed his jacket, and thanked me for the coffee, acting as if the visit had been entirely innocent. "Let me know when you decide on that buyer," he said at the door. "These things are always easier when they're handled quickly." I closed the door behind him and stood there for a long time. His words looped in my mind. The roof would have been halfway caved in by now. From what I understand, it's surprisingly solid. He shouldn't have known anything about the state of that house. Not unless someone had told him, or he had been looking a lot closer than he admitted to the family. He was suspicious. I just didn't know how much he suspected yet or who he was watching. Marvin's visit made me realize we couldn't afford to waste any more time. His slip about the house told me we had to act, and there wasn't much room left for caution. So I retained a new attorney, not Whitlow, whose office was already tangled up with Marvin. I found a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Ms. Calloway, who specialized in financial fraud cases. I brought her everything: the ledger, Constance's report, the copies of the transfer pages, the dates lined up like a map, finally showing the true shape of what had happened. She went through the material methodically, asking precise questions that made me realize just how much weight this case would carry once it left my kitchen table and entered a courtroom. "This is substantial," she said finally, setting the papers down. 公法律角度来看，这串证据非常完整， But I need more than documents. I need a witness statement, someone who can testify to the intent, the threats, and the long-term pattern. I knew instantly who that meant. When I told Evelyn at the beach house, she sat in silence for a long time, the sea wind rattling the windows gently. 23 years, she said softly. I spent 23 years making sure my voice never reached anyone who mattered. I know what I'm asking you to do, I said. I won't pretend it's a small thing. She looked down at her hands, turning them over slowly, as if examining the woman she had become out here alone, fearful and careful. Then, she looked up at me, a new resolve in her eyes. I am tired of being afraid of a man who has never faced a single consequence for anything he's done, she said. If speaking my name aloud is the price to finally make him pay, then I'll say it. 2 days later, we sat in Miss Calloway's office together, and Evelyn gave her statement. It started slow and cautious, but with every sentence her voice grew stronger, until the fear that had kept her hidden for over 2 decades finally broke, turning into something resembling relief. 他正式指控了他. She detailed the threats and the years she spent hiding because of what he had calmly said over a phone line. When it was over, she leaned back in her chair, exhausted but lighter than she had looked since the day I found her on that porch. It's done, she said. It's really done. Ms. Calloway assured us the statement would remain confidential while she prepared the formal filings and gathered the supporting evidence. Only a few select staff members working the file had access, ensuring Marvin would have no warning before the full weight of the case hit him. But 2 nights later, deep into the evening, my phone rang. Ms. Calloway's voice came through tight and anxious. Roberta, I need you to stay calm, she said. We had a serious breach today. One of my paralegals was assigned to organize and scan the evidence for filing. I discovered she took photos of parts of Evelyn's statement on her phone before the documents were secured. It turns out her brother owes Marvin money, and Marvin has been quietly holding that debt over him for years. She admitted she called Marvin before she fully understood the implications. My stomach dropped completely. What does that mean? It means, she said slowly, that somehow Marvin Lashley now knows your sister is alive, and he knows she has given a statement against him. Isaiah had arranged a small family dinner for that weekend. Nothing formal, just a gathering to mark what would have been Lionel's birthday. I came very close to calling and canceling my attendance, unsure if I could sit across a table from Marvin and keep my composure, but I changed my mind. If Marvin knew what was coming, he wasn't going to face it on his terms. He was going to face it on mine. I brought Ms. Calloway's file with me, the ledger, Constance's report, copies of everything. I kept them sealed in a folder right beside me for the entire drive. Marvin arrived before me. When I walked in, he was already sitting at Isaiah's table, composed but noticeably tighter than usual. His smile held just a fraction of a second too long when he greeted me. Roberta, he said, it's good to see you. I wouldn't miss it, I said quietly, taking my seat opposite him. Dinner moved slower than usual. The conversation felt thin, as if everyone at the table could feel something shifting in the air without knowing exactly what it was. Marvin kept glancing my way, his eyes searching and calculating, his usual charm working overtime to cover the panic underneath. When the plates were cleared, I placed the folder on the table. Isaiah, I said, I need you to look at something. All of you do. Mom, what is this? Isaiah frowned, but he reached for the folder anyway. Marvin's hand twitched toward the table, then stopped. Roberta, whatever it is, surely it can wait until after dinner. It's waited 23 years, I said. It can wait through dessert. I opened the folder myself, sliding the ledger toward Isaiah. I watched his eyes scan Lionel's handwriting, the transfers, and the signatures at the bottom of page after page. This is Uncle Marvin's signature? Isaiah said slowly, the confusion on his face deepening into something much darker as he kept reading. Your father found out he was moving funds from the family trust years ago, I said, and he wasn't the only one. Someone else has been alive all this time, forced into hiding because Marvin threatened to harm this family if she ever stepped forward. The table went completely dead silent. Marvin's composure finally fractured, his jaw clenching as everyone's eyes turned to him. This is absolutely ridiculous, he said, his voice dropping its warmth entirely, becoming sharp and clipped. Roberta, I understand you've been under an immense amount of pressure lately, but fabricating something like this, it's unacceptable. It isn't fabricated, I said. Evelyn gave a sworn statement 2 days ago. She's alive, Isaiah. She's been alive the whole time. The color drained from Isaiah's face completely. What? Ask him, I said, gesturing toward Marvin. Ask him why. He told her my children might have an accident on the road if she ever came home. Marvin stood up abruptly, his chair scraping hard against the floor. "I don't have to sit here and listen to completely baseless accusations. You'll be hearing from my attorney regarding defamation, Roberta, I assure you." "He'll have to get in line behind mine," I said calmly. "The lawsuit has already been filed." Isaiah looked between me and Marvin, the folder trembling slightly in his hands. Decades of unquestioned trust were coming undone on his face in real time. "Uncle Marvin," he whispered, "is this true?" Marvin didn't answer. He simply turned, grabbed his coat and walked out, leaving nothing but a dead silence and a son who finally saw exactly who had been pulling his strings. Marvin didn't disappear the way Evelyn had. He couldn't run. Within a week, Ms. Calloway's filings cleared the regular channels, and a formal investigation into 20 years of trust mismanagement began. His name was permanently tied to records that could no longer be quietly smoothed over or dismissed at dinner parties. It didn't resolve overnight. Ms. Calloway warned me early on that financial cases take months, sometimes longer. It was a process of subpoenas, forensic accounting reviews, and hearings, procedures that test patience far more than they satisfy curiosity. Marvin hired his own counsel, denying everything publicly, and for a while he tried to convince the rest of the family that he was the one being wronged. But Isaiah never called him back after that dinner. By the time the preliminary findings confirmed the discrepancies Constance had flagged decades earlier, even the relatives who had defended Marvin's character began to distance themselves. That is exactly what people do when the truth becomes too heavy to deny. I drove out to the beach house nearly every weekend after that. The road didn't feel strange under the wheels anymore, and the gate wasn't rusted shut like the day I first found my sister on the porch. We oiled the hinges ourselves, Evelyn and I, kneeling in the dirt on a Saturday afternoon, laughing harder than we had in longer than either of us could remember. "Isaiah wants to know if we're actually going to keep it," Evelyn said one evening. We were sitting on the steps, just like the first night we reconnected, but the silence between us felt entirely different now. It was lighter. "We're keeping it," I said. "It's not for sale. It never should have been." She smiled, leaning her shoulder against mine. "Lionel would be happy knowing it finally brought us back together instead of pulling us apart. He spent years driving out here just to keep you safe. 4 times a year, never more than 2 days, and never telling me why," I said. "I used to think that silence meant something was missing between us." I shook my head slowly. It turns out it meant he was protecting both of us the only way he knew how. We sat there for a long time, watching the sun lower itself over the water. The same water that had witnessed and outlasted every secret anyone had ever tried to bury. The investigation will reach its conclusion in its own time, and Marvin will eventually answer for what he did, in rooms far less forgiving than a quiet beach porch at sunset. But the house had already given us back what a court judgment never could. It gave me my sister back, it gave Evelyn her voice, and it gave us both a peace we thought we'd never find again. Not since the day I forced open that rusty gate and found her standing there like a ghost. I sat with that thought in the quiet for a long time, watching the waves roll steadily against the shore. The house was never useless. It had been holding on to the truth the whole time.